Hey, welcome back, guys. Good to have you here. In this session, we're going to start working on the projects. So, thus far, we have covered JavaScript concepts using PowerPoint slides or Google Slides. Uh, I will be taking a more hands-on approach from now on. So, you will see me coding a bit and focusing less on the slides. We have to apply what we learned in the previous sessions and understand how we can use JavaScript to manipulate the HTML files. Okay, so before we begin, let's look at the session outline. Right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to recap what we learned in previous sessions and understand how we can apply this in this project. The next one is we're going to understand how we can manipulate the DOM to get the user inputted information, and we have to get this information and do some calculations on top of it and display the results, right? So what is the actual project that we are building, right? So we'll see that after we're done with recap. So in this session, we're going to be building a simple calculator application. The scope of the application is just the user enters two numerical values, and depending on those values, we perform some calculations and display the result, right? So let's go ahead. All right, so this is the project scope. So we'll create a simple HTML page, a simple HTML form that will collect two values from the user and perform these arithmetic operations. So the requirements for this project are you need to have a code editor installed, like Visual Studio Code or Sublime Text, and a web browser installed, ideally Google Chrome. I have all these tools installed, so I will not be installing them again. But if you don't, please go ahead and install them. The project source files are available on GitHub. So if you remember, like we discussed in the session 1, GitHub is a source control. Git is a source control, but GitHub is a place where we can store our source code. So I have this GitHub page, and you can access this project source files over there. You can download it, and you can use it for your review. All right, so the first thing we have to understand is we have to manipulate the DOM using JavaScript. So before we do that, we have to first build a HTML form, get the user inputted values in there, and then access those inputted values using JavaScript. So let's actually begin coding. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and create a folder on my desktop and call it a projects folder. I'll store all my projects in this folder. So I'll create another folder called calculator, since that's our first project. And I will open up this folder in Visual Studio Code so that we can create all the necessary files for this project. Alright, so now that the folder has been created, let's create our first file. I'm going to name this file as index.html. Right. Let me get rid of this sidebar. Okay, now let's first think about how we're going to create this project. So let's create an outline. So what are the main essential components that we need to create a calculator? So we need a number. We actually need two numbers. Let's create a very simple calculator with just arithmetic operations on two numbers. Right? So we need to get two numbers from the user, and we need to show the arithmetic operation result to the user when the user selects appropriate arithmetic operation that they want to perform on those two numbers. Right? So if it's 5 and 6 and they want to add, so we'll have an add button. When they click on it, they will see the result as 11. Okay, So let me go ahead and add a boilerplate code. Now this particular project, I'm not going to cover HTML and CSS. You should already be familiar with that. But that said, I will do add some boilerplate code in here, as well as add Bootstrap, that is the CSS framework, so that a project has some sort of structure and it does not look as ugly as we would like. So I just added a boilerplate code, and I'm going to name this as calculator application. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and add Bootstrap. All right, so this is good. Now we'll add the script tag in just a moment here, but let's first add the HTML for accepting two numbers from the user. So I'm going to go ahead and create a form. I close this up, and I'm going to name this form as calculator. You'll see just in a moment why I named this form calculator. And let me get two numbers from the user. So the way we get two numbers or any inputted value from the user is we use the input tag. So let's create number 1, number 2, and I'm going to use an input tag here. So what attributes do we need for the input tag? So we need a type, the type of text. We need a name, and I'm going to name this as number 1. So I'm going to remove the space. All right, and at the end of this, I'm going to add a break tag. All right, so that looks fine. Let me just reuse this again and change this to number 2. All right, so we have our two input fields for accepting two user values. Now we need to show them in a result. All right, so I'm just going to use input tag again to show the results. So I'm going to say get results, get result, and reuse this. And this will say total. All right. Okay, so we have three input values where we can get user input and display the result. Now we need some sort of trigger to execute our JavaScript, right? So what we will do is we will add a set of buttons that will hold our logic for the arithmetic operations that we want to perform on these two numbers. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a group of buttons for the arithmetic operations that we want to perform. So if you remember that we saw in the slide the kind of arithmetic operations we want to perform. So these were addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and modulus. So we'll need at least 5 buttons. So let me go ahead and create those. All right, so I'm going to use Bootstrap for grouping these buttons together. So let's say class of container, class of row, and I'm going to create every other as a class column. Oh, come on. All right, so let me create the first button in here. So I'll say input type of button. I'll say value is, let's say, addition, and on click. Now when we click on this button, we want to execute the JavaScript. So I'm just gonna keep this blank for just a moment, and we'll get back here. Right, so this is for addition, and I'm just gonna reuse this code again for the other operations. So we have addition. Now we need one for subtraction. So I'll say sub. We need one for multiplication. Need one for division, and one as modulus. Alright, so let's first check out and see if this HTML code that we have entered is correct and everything looks in order. So now to run this application, what you can do is you can click on the index.html directly, like let's say I go in here and I say open with Google Chrome, and this will work. Okay, so this looks a bit ugly, I admit that, but we're not concerned about the aesthetics of this application, but the functionality. So you can either double click on that file and open this up in this fashion, or the way I recommend is starting a live server so that you can make sure all the index.html as well as any of the CSS files or JavaScript files that we'll create in the next sessions will be loaded correctly. So what we can do is we can add a live server extension to our code editor. So I'm using Visual Studio Code, and most of the code editors will have some sort of extension. All you have to do is figure out a way how to install it. So I'm going to go ahead and, okay, this is not the Visual Studio Code editor. Okay. All you have to do is go ahead and install this extension for your particular code editor. So in Visual Studio Code, all I can do is select the extensions tab right on the left hand side here. Click on it, and I'm going to search live server. All right, so this is the one that I want, and I'm going to install it. Now once you install this, notice you get an option of go live on the bottom right corner of the screen. I'm going to close this again. Now you have go live option here, so all I can do is select this and it will start a server and open up the application. Now if you notice the URL here, it shows my local host address and the port that the server is running on. Now of course you can customize this port according to your needs, but I'm not going to cover this. I'm not going to cover the change of port in this session. So I'm going to keep this running. So if we make any changes overall to the code, they will be reflected here. So let's try to click on any one of these buttons, and if you notice, nothing happens, right? So let's now start by adding our JavaScript logic here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a script tag in the head section of the HTML and add all our logic for these arithmetic operations that we want to perform. Okay, so let me collapse this. Let me open this up, and let me go ahead and add some space so that I can work. I'll add a script tag. Say language. We don't need to add language, I don't think it's necessary, but I'm just gonna add it so that I don't get any errors. So I'll say JavaScript type of text and JavaScript. Alright. If you remember how to create function, we use the function keyword followed by the function name. So in this case, it is going to be addition, and now I want to access two values, the two values that the user has inputted. So I need to store those values in variables, right? So first of all, how do we access these values, right? So if we scroll down and if we understand this, that we have two input tags, right? And each one of them has a different name. So what we can do is we can access them by the name, but before we access the input tag, we need to understand that input tags are a child element inside the form element, right? So we first have to access the form and then go and make our way into these input tags, right? So let me first create two variables so that we can understand much more clearly. So I'll create var a, come on, var a equal to, say I'll put it up blank string for now. So the user has inputted values in the input box, but they are in the format of text, right? So we have a type of text. Now we want them in the number format. So I'm going to use the number function that the JavaScript provides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say number, and in here I want to access the form and then the value inputted by the user for number one. So how do we do this? If you remember DOM, the way we access it, we use the document object, then we add a period, and we want to access the form first. So the form name is calculator. So I'll just say calculator. And now I want to access number one. Okay, so the first number I want to access. So I'm going to say number one, and I want to access its value. So I'll say value. I'm going to do the same thing for the second number. Yeah, so now we have the two variables here that hold the value of the numbers that the user has inputted are going to perform the arithmetic operation, right? So we store the value of this arithmetic operation in a different variable. So let me define a variable. So I'll say variable c to a plus b, right? Since we're doing addition, I've added the plus symbol right here. So now what you want to do is you want to display the value of c into the third input box that we had created. So the third input box was get result. Now the way I can access it is by accessing the total attribute, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say document dot calculator dot total, since the name of that input tag is total, and I'm going to set its value to C. Alright, so I think this looks good. So let's test this out. Our server is already running, so it should work. Okay, I think the tab got closed here. So what's the port here again? It's 5500. So let me go to localhost 5500. Right. I'm going to add two values. So let's say 2 and 10. Okay, it does not work. Why does not it work? Oh, I got an error. Okay, so this is fine. We don't need to worry ourselves about this error. This is a bootstrap error. Now this is not working. Why is it not working? Oh, you know why? Because we just created a function and never called it, right? So what we need to do is we need to add this function to the button that we had already created. So remember this, I left this purposefully empty. So we need to call that function that we just created in here. So what I can do is I can just say addition and just call it. But I'm going to add a JavaScript here so that it knows to access the script tag. Okay, and let me add a semicolon. I think we're good to go. Let's go here. Say 2, 10, add 12. We get 12. Let's add a big number here now. Let's say 1,000 and 5,000. Yep, we get it. We get the correct result, right? So let's try subtraction. Doesn't work. Multiplication doesn't work because we haven't written functions for those. So let's write the functions for those and then call those functions in the on-click method right here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just copy and paste this and just change the operator right here, because since we are dealing with only 3 numbers, right, so 2 are the input and 1 is the output, so we can use this same code again. So let me create first the functions that we want. So we have function subtraction, and we have multiplication as well as division. And we have modulus. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste all of this into these functions. Now ideally what you can do is you can create one function to access the values and then call that function every time, but for the sake of creating this simple, we are just reusing this again and again for each function. So we just got done with subtraction. Now we go ahead in multiplication, just change the operand right here, save this. We got done with multiplication. Let's add the division. All right, so division is done. Let's add in modulus. So if you remember modulus sign, right here. All right, so let's just save this and go back to our application. I'll just remove this white space right here. Okay. Oh, you know what? I actually forgot to add the function again to the on-click event. So let me do that real quickly. So we need to add subtraction, multiplication, division, modulus right here. So expand this, and I'm going to type JavaScript subtraction, JavaScript multiplication, and one for division, and one for modulus. All right, so I think we're done here. We should go back to the application and see if this works. All right, so let's take, say, 2 numbers. Let's check out addition, it works. Subtraction, it works perfectly fine. Let's do multiplication, it works. The division works too. And the modulus is 0 because, yeah, that is correct, the modulus is 0. Right, so let me add this as 33, 320, addition, modulus is 0. That's working fine. So let's play with some numbers here. Let me add a smaller number. So let's say this is 10 and this is 1000. Divide, you get a negative symbol right here. So this is working perfectly fine. And divide, you get in decimal. And the mod is 10. Yep, this works perfectly fine. Looks like it works, guys. The application is done. So now what we can do is we can improve on this project. You can style it correctly. You can add a better looking button. You know, if I go back to our code, we can probably refactor it a bit. I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to give you some tips on how you can refactor the code. Right. So if we go on to the script, if you see, we have 4 different functions for 4 different operations, and for each function we are getting value from the user. So what you can do is you can write one function where you get the value, and you can rerun this function for each of these operations instead of writing these 2 lines each and every time. You can also create a separate function for displaying the result, right? And if you want to compress this more, what you can do is you can write a single function calling it arithmetic operations, and based on what the user clicks, you can just write a switch case where you inject the operator based on the uh, user click on the buttons. Okay, that's one way to do it. And I think we're done with this project right here. Yep, we are done. So let's now go back to the slides. Let me close this. I don't need the bootstrap. Right, so we got done with the printing of results to the DOM. We attached the event handler for onClick. We actually didn't attach an event handler, so we actually directly added the function into the onClick event, and we displayed the result in the last input box. And this is the project, right? So there are a few resources that I've added. So if you want, you can expand on this calculator. You can work on creating a scientific calculator or a mortgage calculator, right? So you can go to these links and understand this concept more thoroughly by practicing. Okay, and this concludes for project 2. I'll see you in, sorry, this concludes project 1. I'll see you in project 2. Take care. Bye bye.